Fritzl has told investigators that his decision to incarcerate his daughter was to rescue her from what he described as persons of questionable moral standards, and that ever since she started puberty, Elisabeth had ceased to obey his rules.
Apparently Elisabeth had already caused trouble before. She had disappeared once before and then turned up again. But if there are 7 children, one of them's bound to be trouble. You just have to accept these things happen. Doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong as a parent.
In planning Elisabeth's disappearance, Fritzl seems to have been meticulous. He was known to be highly organised, a quality appreciated by those with whom he did business. The family ran a summer guest house in the mountains and rented land from Anton Graf.
We had a business relationship. He was correct. If he gave you his word, you could count on it. If he borrowed a tool and said he would return it 2 days later, then 2 days later it was back. What he said he did, you could always count on it.
Anton Graf saw the Fritzls every summer and had known Elisabeth throughout her childhood. So when she went missing, Joseph was sure to let him know all about it.
And then one day he came to see us in a right old state, and he told us, Lizzie won't be coming home. She's involved in a sect and has disappeared.
What her father has said is not true at all, in no way whatsoever. That she went off the rails, that she took drugs, that she joined a sect. It's not true at all. She wasn't the type to be influenced by a sect. She knew exactly what she did and what she wanted to do.
To reinforce the idea that his daughter had disappeared to join a sect, Joseph Fritzl began an elaborate deception which lasted over 2 decades. To stop too many probing questions, he even started to manufacture evidence.
And a bit later on, I don't remember exactly when, he told us that a letter had arrived. The letter said that it was pointless to search for her because she was deeply involved with the sect, and that she was so happy there that she was definitely not coming home.
Elisabeth was gone for 24 years. Since her release, Elisabeth has told police her father drugged her, dragged her to the cellar and chained her to the wall. For the first 4 years of her incarceration, she was alone. According to her own account, the only visitor she had was her captor, who raped her every few days. It seems her father's web of lies had worked. No one came looking for Elisabeth, not her mother, nor her friends, nor the police.
Das ist ein Vorgang, den die Polizei immer wieder beobachtet, den man auch als Privatmensch kennt, denn irgendwann...
This is something the police see time and time again. And as we all know, every child leaves the family home at some point. Then her 19th birthday arrived, and the Austrian police aren't allowed to search for missing persons over the age of 19, because from this age onwards an Austrian citizen can go anywhere in the world they want to.
Aufhalten auf dieser Welt, wo immer man möchte.
We were a couple. We wrote to each other, we saw each other, but all of a sudden all contact ended, and when I called I was palmed off. It was over, and I didn't hear from her again.
Elisabeth Fritzl had simply vanished. No one took notice of the many clues that could have saved her. Underneath number 40 Ibstrasse, a father had imprisoned his daughter Elisabeth, tied her up, and used her as his sex slave. After 4 years alone, the next stage of her ordeal began. having her father's children. In 1988, Kirsten was born, delivered in the cellar. Elisabeth was just 22.
If we want to discuss when things deteriorated for Elisabeth, then certainly there was the moment when she realized that she was pregnant for the first time. And then the worry throughout the pregnancy whether her child would be healthy. And the births themselves would have taken their toll, especially given there was no help on hand, like a midwife or a doctor.
Parallels have been drawn with another Austrian case, the kidnap of Natascha Kampusch. She was held for 8 years in a cellar from the age of 10 before escaping. Like her, Elisabeth would have had to reach a compromise with her captor to survive.
Since she was taken prisoner at the age of 18 and kept imprisoned, she must have been extremely scared. The question is, how did she cope with this fear? And at what point was her will broken? Because that's something we would expect to happen. And then you see something called Stockholm Syndrome, which is when the victim becomes resigned to their abuse.
Escaping from her dungeon with its 8 locked doors was always going to be difficult, but with pregnancy it seems she might have simply given up.
There was a change. She said herself that even before she was incarcerated, she'd been abused by her father, and after being taken prisoner, had endured brutal physical violence in some shape or form. And then she told us that this had lessened.
In total, Elisabeth was to have 7 of her father's children. Michael died soon after birth, and the body was incinerated by Fritzl at the house. 3 others, Felix, now 5, Stefan, now 18, and Kirsten, now 19, led a life in captivity with their mother. But Fritzl selected the middle 3 children for a life of freedom upstairs. Alexander, now 12, Monika, 14, and Lisa, 15.
Warum dieser Mann gerade 3 Kinder mittendrin geboren nach oben nimmt?
Why this man took these 3 middle children upstairs? We'll probably never get a final clear answer. You can imagine that it was getting a bit crowded. You mustn't forget, the more prisoners in the cellar, the more complicated it became to look after them.
Taking them upstairs posed its own problems. How to explain the arrival of the babies? His solution was simple. Elisabeth was a bad mother who had abandoned her children. A pattern was established. In the middle of the night, a baby would be left on the Fritzl's doorstep with a note. Read now in the knowledge that her father was forcing her to give up her own children, Elisabeth's words are heartbreaking.
I'm really sorry that I have to turn to you again. I hope Lisa is doing well. She must have grown a bit by now. Monika is now 9.5 months old. She was breastfed for 7.5 months. She now eats almost anything, but she still likes the bottle best. The hole at the teat has to be a little bigger for her.
When the second baby was abandoned, the Austrian press started to take an interest. Mark Perry was the journalist covering the case.
1994, the first story, just after Christmas. What sort of a mother must she be? Bereits zum 2. Mal legt eine junge Frau ihr Baby vor der Wohnungstür ihrer Eltern in Amstetten weg. That's the 2nd time she put the baby in front of the door of her grandchildren. How bad must she be? And then I heard Mr. Fritzl quoting him, our daughter has been vanishing since 1984. We think she's in the hands of some religious group, and in fact she was in his hands.
Even social services bought Fritzl's story.
If, as people assumed, and her father kept claiming, Elizabeth was living with the sect, it wouldn't have been difficult at all for a member of the sect to give Elizabeth a lift at night, and for her to leave the baby on the doorstep at a time when she wouldn't have been seen.
And Fritzl's closest neighbours believed his story too.
People said that it was irresponsible. What a bad mother Elizabeth was just to leave the children on the doorstep. Frau Fritzl already had 7 children, and now she had to bring up grandchildren as well. Terrible.
Over the 24 years Elizabeth was in captivity, there were over 100 tenants renting rooms in the Fritzl house, right above her prison.